B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Tuesday. It's Pi Day, if you keep track of things like that. 3.14.17. And I'm back from a day of playing hooky in the Sierra Nevada. My cover story is I went up to check the snowpack, and it's still very thick and very deep. But we've had a heat wave here in Northern California, and that deep snowpack is melting quickly. So if you're downstream, the Feather River, the Sacramento River system, be prepared because there could be a wall of water coming your way very soon. I had a great time. Nice to get up there and work out my gravity method of skiing. And I recruited 3 new podcast listeners, some guys from Iowa, who said they really dig podcasts. And when they heard that I'm a lefty, they said, okay, we're in. So it was a very worthwhile outing. And while I was away, we learned the stark details of the cruel plan hatched by Republicans to basically tell older, poor people in this country, you can just go and die. And you may think that's melodramatic, but when you see the numbers that over 10 years, 24, maybe 26 million people will not have health insurance in this country, and the way the replacement of Obamacare is being drafted, the weight of it falls exceptionally on older, low-income people, people who haven't reached Social Security and Medicare age, who might die before they get there. And the idea that the free market and an end to the employer mandate that employers have to provide health care insurance for their full-time employees, the claim that this is going to lower premiums and reinvigorate competition in our health care system is pure bullshit. And it is cynical bullshit that is advanced by people who know the true implications of what they're doing. But Mitch McConnell can still summon a spin phrase. The Congressional Budget Office agrees with that the American Health Care Act will ultimately lower premiums and increase access to care, except if you're one of those 24 million people. Now, the 24 million is based on the Congressional Budget Office, which is led by a Republican appointee. The 26 million figure comes from the Steve Bannon White House. And some interpret that as a way to try to undercut Paul Ryan's approach to repealing and replacing Obamacare. Now, this could die. In the House, it may not, they may have to scrap this and start over again. And that wouldn't be all bad. But the way the bill achieves the claimed accomplishments of the Republicans depends on penalizing older patients and rewarding younger ones. And, of course, it'll all be the basis for massive cuts in federal aid to states for Medicaid and the subsidies to individuals, like me, that Obamacare has provided. Now, the change in tax credits is the most substantial part of this. The combined difference in how much the extra older customer will have to pay for health insurance is enormous. An average 64-year-old earning $26,500 would need to pay, after using a subsidy, would increase from $1,700 today to $14,000 under the Republican plan. And let me rescope that for you. Somebody with an income of only $26,000 would have to pay more than half to get health care coverage. And we don't even know if that coverage would be comparable to what that person is getting today. And this hits home to your humble host. I don't make a secret of my age. I will be 64 in 5 weeks. And what I'm looking at is that my Obamacare policy will run through the remainder of 2017, and then I have a 4-month gap before I can get covered under Medicare. Now, fortunately for me, I have a backup plan. My union, AFTRA, SAG-AFTRA, will cover me at a very high rate for the 4 months and 3 weeks that I will be left out in the cold. But I think of many people who earn less than me, who don't have a pension, and who face a very difficult future. And I'm a healthy guy. But so many of my friends have had cancers and many serious conditions or illnesses that have set them back financially, made it impossible for them to work. And that combination can kill you. And so I'm not being overly dramatic when I say that the message from Republicans is just go die. Because that is the bottom line here. And the bullshit that's being advanced as the rationale for this doesn't hold up to close scrutiny. We know that the Republicans claim that Obamacare is about to implode. And they've done everything they can to make that happen. But the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, basically asserts that Obamacare is stable, and the twin requirements that employers have to provide coverage and individuals must buy coverage or pay a fine, that, the CBO says, is keeping the current insurance market stable. Now, the Republicans have claimed that the number of people lacking coverage will not increase. That is a flat-out lie. And even if you want to claim, like the Republicans do, that, oh, the CBO gets it wrong, they got it wrong on how many people would use Obamacare, so we can't believe what they say today, pick your favorite factor. Take the CBO estimate and reduce it by 10%, 20%, 40%, 50%. How can any elected official in the House or the Senate vote for a law that they know will deny coverage to some portion of up to 26 million people over the next 10 years? Again, pick your number. I don't think there is any number that is morally acceptable. And in fact, we should be looking at ways to use single payer, expand Medicare in a sensible way. That is the way out of this mess. Now, Tom Price lied on the Sunday talk shows on NBC. He said more people will be covered than are covered right now at an average cost that is less. But in order to make any truth out of that dissembling, you're talking about coverage that has to be hollowed out. Because there is no way that any rational person can argue that health care costs are going to go down in this country through competition, the free market, or any of that. It's a matter of whether we can slow the rate of increase. Boy, this is really, really very discouraging. And one of the reasons that the Republicans claim that the cost of coverage will decrease is that it'll be cheaper because older Americans will give up on buying insurance. Older Americans are the most expensive people to cover and take care of. And so this is just so detached from reality. And we're seeing it happen right before our eyes. And with the elimination of the employer mandate, those of you, the 90% who currently enjoy relatively decent coverage with much less cost to you, you're paying more than you used to, but you're getting a great deal compared to people who are out there buying individual coverage on their own. And without the exchanges that Obamacare opened up, we are just sitting ducks. And one of the other points I wanted to make that came up last week, when the Republicans say that Obamacare is about to implode and skyrocketing premium increases show how bad it is. Well, there's only one state, Arizona, that had over 100% in insurance premium increases, and it's a very isolated area, and relatively few people are covered. But the estimated cost for a 64-year-old is over a 700% increase between what they're paying this year and what they would pay next year under this Republican plan. And part of the poisonous package of what is called the American Health Care Act is the plan to cut all funding for Planned Parenthood. And you may know that Mike Pence, when he was governor of Indiana, was the first to proudly roll back Planned Parenthood services. And I imagine that at the state borders there should be a sign, "Welcome to Indiana, the Hoosier state, with more sexually transmitted diseases, more women with cancer, and more unwanted children than any other state in the Union." Because that's the real outcome of cutting Planned Parenthood. And sure, it plays to the Republican base, and it's a proxy for the fight against abortion rights in this country. But even the math doesn't really make sense. The CBO said that eliminating Planned Parenthood funding would save $178 million this fiscal year, $234 million a year starting next year. But it would shift much of those costs to Medicaid, where the spending would go up by at least $77 million a year. So these are false notions of economy that are mostly driven by ugly right-wing politics. So a lot of ink spilled over the weekend about the firing of U.S. attorneys around the country by Jeff Sessions and the Trump Justice Department. And the hand-wringing is really unnecessary. Certainly, there are many cases in the pipeline that might get dismissed or flushed out by new political appointees. But as I look at this, it really points up the failure of Barack Obama to purge the Republican holdovers, many of whom remained in office throughout his entire 2 terms. And Preet Bharara, he's got an unusual name, B-H-A-R-A-R-A. Bharara? I think it's Bharara. Anyway, he's a 48-year-old guy. He is a good pal of Chuck Schumer's. He was Schumer's staffer in the Senate before he was appointed. And he decided that because Donald Trump had indicated that he's planning to keep Bharara on, that when Jeff Sessions sent out the mass resignation demands, that Preet said no. He said, "No, you're going to have to fire me." And they did on Saturday. Now, there's a story in the New York Times about how this could screw up the prosecution of Fox News, the sexual harassment suits over there. And it is interesting because we're hearing that Mark Mukasey, a former prosecutor, the son of the former judge and the final attorney general under George W. Bush, Michael Mukasey, who's a real asshole. I'm sorry, he just is. He may be the replacement for Preet Bharara. And he was an advisor. He was paid through his law firm to work for Fox News and represented Roger Ailes during the departure period or pre-departure period for Ailes. And Mukasey now works as a partner at Greenberg Traurig. That's the shop where Jack Abramoff ran his juice-peddling operation out of Washington back during the W administration. So when people tell you how awful this is and that this is all, ugly politics and Trump did this to prevent prosecutions of himself or his cronies, just ask yourself, can you name a single Wall Street executive who was investigated, indicted, and convicted for the 2008 mortgage meltdown by Preet Bharara? Yeah, get back to me with that, will you, please? Now, the White House is trying to open up some wiggle room in the tweet storm that Donald Trump unleashed a week ago on Saturday, 10 days ago. Yesterday, Sean Spicer, talking about the president's tweet accusing Barack Obama of ordering wiretaps on Trump Tower. Well, Spicer is trying to wiggle out of this by, claiming that the explicit language of Donald Trump in his 140-character tweets was not that explicit. Quote, he doesn't really think that President Obama went up and tapped his phone personally. Well, no one has suggested that. This is a non-denial denial. What Trump actually said was that Obama had my wires tapped, and wires and tapped were in quotes. And so we're supposed to now believe that, well, the president was clear that, wiretapping was in quotes. That spans a whole host of surveillance types of options. Now, come on. I mean, he said what he said, and he can't prove it. And the Justice Department has asked the House Intelligence Committee for more time to find evidence to support the president's claim. Why don't they call him? And Kellyanne Conway was on TV Monday, and her best line was, "Well, I'm not Inspector Gadget. I don't believe people are using the microwave to spy on the Trump campaign." Now, this idiocy could be ended immediately. We know that. The president has the power to declassify the information that he claims exists to support his contention. So why is he playing games with us? And in Glenn Greenwald's most recent post, he says that Rand Paul, who appeared on a Sunday television chat show, was partly correct when he suggested that Donald Trump may have been wiretapped without a judicial warrant of any kind. And Greenwald goes into the details of the FISA reform bill that Barack Obama said he would oppose as a candidate in 2008, and as soon as he had the nomination sewed up, he ignored his pledge and went ahead and voted for it. It's when I really felt first betrayed by Obama. And in it, Section 702 basically creates this back door where the NSA can say, well, we didn't try to wiretap, for example, Mike Flynn. We were just wiretapping the Russian ambassador, and he was talking to Mike Flynn, so it was incidental. And once the incidentalness occurred, well, then we just heard what we heard. Now, according to Greenwald, who is quoting Rand Paul, President Obama was eavesdropped on his phone calls 1,227 times. Now, when the NSA encounters a U.S. person, that's the term, they are supposed to mask that side of the conversation. Now, who's silly enough to believe this actually happens? And as General Hayden has said, and so did Ed Snowden, even low-level employees can unmask the masked bullshit. I mean, come on. How stupid do they think we are? So Greenwald avers Paul's explanation is correct. The NSA is empowered to spy on Americans' communications without a warrant, and this is the dirty little secret of the U.S. surveillance state. And as Greenwald documented at the height of the controversy over the Snowden reporting, top government officials, including President Obama, constantly deceived and continue to deceive the public by falsely telling them that their communications cannot be monitored without a warrant. And Greenwald finds defenders of the intelligence community, including a former NSA lawyer, who then respond to Rand Paul by saying this is absolutely false and an irresponsible claim. Reverse targeting is as explicitly banned under procedures. Senator Paul is accusing the intelligence community of a grave violation. And Greenwald responds, the only thing here that's false and irresponsible is Susan Hennessy's attempt to deceive the public about the domestic spying powers of her former employer. And this reverse targeting is when you incidentally find an American talking to a foreigner, and then you begin to monitor the American. So there's a lot in Greenwald's article. I've linked to it in the show file for today's podcast, and I hope you take a look, because it does offer a very clear scenario of how Trump and his staff could have been wiretapped without Obama even knowing about it, ordering it, or receiving the reports on it. And so we continue to have this really fuzzy gray area. And today I'm releasing an in-depth interview to all my subscribers. PeterBCollins.com, iTunes, TuneIn, wherever you find the podcast, with Yasha Levine. He's an American citizen, was born in Russia. He's currently in Russia. When I spoke to him earlier today, he Skyped in from St. Petersburg. And his most recent article, a lengthy piece at the Baffler, is entitled From Russia with Panic. And in my discussion with Yasha Levine, We recap the fact-free assertions that have come from the intelligence community embraced by President Obama, his false choice offered at a news conference in December. Who are you going to believe, our intelligence community or the Russians? And what's most important is that Yasha Levine serves up some history and context for this current whatever it is. And that is, he takes us back to the war in the former Soviet Republic of Georgia in 2008, which was accompanied by cyber warfare claims from both sides. And it's a very interesting look and has interesting parallels to this controversy today. So I have linked to the Baffler article in the show file for this podcast, and toward the end of the interview, I asked Yasha Levine, and I re-invoked Obama's question, can we believe the intelligence community? Can we believe the Russians? I asked him, who can we believe?
We can't believe anyone. I mean, that's a sad reality of the times we live in, I think. I mean, of course, you can believe me, but no, I mean, look, really, we do have to, there are, in terms of do you believe our intelligence services or do you believe Russia? Well, you can't believe either, right? And, the sad fact is we have very little evidence to go on, or there's very few people that are credible in this world that are left and that haven't been politicized and politicized into complete irrelevance in terms of credibility. I mean, that is the sad fact of today's of the world that we live in, is that there is really, it seems like, no one or very few people that we can trust, and it's definitely not the American intelligence agencies, and it's definitely not Russia. And that's a sad fact. I don't know. I mean, it really saddens me.
You can hear my full interview with Yasha Levine, released to subscribers today at peterbcollins.com and all our outlets. And hey, Lydia Dolan just signed up for a new annual subscription this morning. Thank you, Lydia. You've got first crack at the Yasha Levine interview. And we also want to thank Paul Tomaselli, Cynthia Von Hendricks, and Abby McMillan for their monthly support of the Peter B. Collins podcast via subscriptions. You can do it too. Come on over at peterbcollins.com. You click on the menu button, you pull it down, you click on Become a Subscriber, takes you to the sign-up page, and in minutes you can pick up a plan that's comfortable for you, $5, $10, $20 a month, or our $50 annual subscription. And I very much appreciate your support. Well, the U.S. travel ban, the crackdown on immigrants, on returning citizens and legal residents, it's a virus that's spreading across the globe. And just over the weekend, it was actually on Monday, a British activist named Hugh Lanning of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign was barred from entry to Israel, and he was deported because his organization is claimed to have ties to Hamas and is one of the leading forces promoting boycott, divestment, and sanction. And the Associated Press article about this adopts the talking points of Israel and really poisons the unbiased nature of a news article that this should be by referring to the group Palestine Solidarity Campaign as one of the leading forces seeking to delegitimize Israel. Now, the Zionists argue that if you try to use your economic power to send a message to Israel that you support the Palestinians and their aspirations, that you are delegitimizing Israel. And for myself, the most I care to do is delegitimize the extreme positions of the Zionist extremists in that government. I don't call for wiping out the state of Israel. I support its establishment. I want it to be an honorable neighbor to the Palestinians, and it clearly is not. But those comments would be construed as attempts to delegitimize Israel, because they're not listening to what I'm saying or what I think. They basically just say, if you don't agree with us, you're not welcome here. And Jeff Halper, an American who moved to Israel more than 25 years ago, he set up the Committee Against Home Demolitions. I've interviewed him several times. He was detained by Israeli authorities. He was released afterward, but he was leading a tourist group through a tour, And he was stopped by the police, who claimed that he had documents supporting boycott, divestment, and sanction. It wasn't true. They rifled through all his papers, and they ultimately did release him, but it's a real indication of the police-state tone in Israel today. And this virus is spreading right here to the United States. Vice News is reporting that in the month of February, U.S. Customs and Border Patrol agents searched more than 5,000 electronic devices, smartphones, and computers of individuals who were entering the United States. Now, NBC News tracked down 25 of those 5,000 people, and 23 of them were Muslim. Now, that's not an unbiased cross-section of the group. It's just a random sample. But that's deeply troubling. And I don't know, I think I may put my gizmos in my checked baggage next time. Of course, at Customs, you often have your bags there, and I guess they can demand to go through them. And this Vice article claims that it's been legal for a long time for the Customs agents to search your phones. I find that very questionable, especially for American citizens. We have a Fourth Amendment right. And I believe that these searches, again, of Americans are deeply unconstitutional. Well, almost every day I include a story about immigration. And often these are very tragic stories. But today has a happy ending, at least for now. I've told you about the 14-year-old boy from Honduras. He's been jailed for almost a year in a juvenile detention center here in Northern California, but he was released on Monday after lawyers and Congressman John Garamendi, who represents that district, intervened. And he was granted refugee status in early January, yet the bureaucracy had kept him held at this facility, and he is going to be lined up with a foster family, at least for the time being. The ethical problems of the Trump family and related people have not been resolved, and we have a new one confronting us now. It's a transaction involving a Manhattan office building at 666 Fifth Avenue, which is controlled by the Kushner family. Jared Kushner is the son-in-law of Donald Trump. He is an unpaid White House advisor, and he's unpaid in part because I guess they were concerned that if he was on the payroll, he'd have to comply with the ethics rules. So Jared Kushner, who claims he has sold his interest in his family's company, nevertheless, we see that the Kushner family is in a $4 billion transaction with a Chinese company that bought the Waldorf Astoria and other American properties. It's called Anbang, or Anbang, and some people suggest that it is linked to the Chinese government. Now, this deal appears to be awarding the Kushners with a profit of at least $500 million and reduced liabilities of another $200 million. And if Anbang or Anbang is tight or tied to the Chinese government, this is a very serious problem. In the Netherlands, there's an election on Wednesday that could be a replay of the Trump election here, the Brexit vote in Britain. Mark Rutte is the current prime minister, and the polls show that he is in deep trouble. The right-wing nationalist Muslim hater Geert Wilders is really surging. And Rutte took the opportunity to remind voters, remember the Brexit. We all thought that would never happen. Remember the U.S. election? So let's not make that mistake again. These elections are crucial. Let us stop the domino effect right this week, this Wednesday, the domino effect of the wrong sort of populism winning in this world. I think that his appeal to rational thinking, just like we saw here in the United States, is unlikely to succeed. BuzzFeed reports that Trump is giving his generals wide latitude, and the additional 400 troops for Syria last week were approved at the Pentagon level, not at the White House. And the Obama administration, which did micromanage almost everything down to the drone strikes, the Tuesday drone meeting, well, this is very, very different. And my bottom line is it appears Trump may want to give the generals latitude so he can blame them and fire them if things go badly. Exxon Mobil Tillerson, he's on his way to Asia for a round of meetings, and he's going without reporters. The typical deployment of State Department reporters were uninvited to travel on his plane, and they have filed protests. But Tillerson is going to South Korea and a few other countries. South Korea has been promised a new batch of American drones called Gray Eagles, which are weaponized drones, an enhanced version of the Predator drone. And this is to police the 38th parallel with North Korea, the border. And this represents a kind of escalation. And as I've mentioned, I think the best way to deal with Kim Jong-un and North Korea is to ignore them whenever possible. Now, Rexon Tillerson, we're learning when he was CEO of Exxon, used an alias email address to send and receive information related to climate change and maybe to manage his Ashley Madison account. I just added that, okay? And he didn't use the pseudonym Carlos Danger. That one's already taken by Anthony Weiner. No, his fake name is Wayne Tracker. His middle name is Wayne. And we'll have to see if he manages his State Department email a little better than Hillary did. And finally today, the Vault 7 release last week alerted many people for the first time, not me and probably not you, that there are all kinds of devices that can be hacked, from surveillance cameras to toaster ovens and microwaves, TV sets that you talk to. But you never expected the Internet of Things to include the Internet of Sexy Things. Well, a Canadian sex toy company, the maker of the WeVibe, has agreed to pay customers up to about $10,000 each. That's in Canadian dollars. A $4 million total to the class action of owners of the smart vibrator called WeVibe that has a Bluetooth control system. Now, the idea of the Bluetooth is that, let's say you want to please your partner and she's using a vibrator. You can control the vibrator on your smartphone. But it's an easily hackable system that would allow somebody else with a smartphone to override your control of that vibrator. And I'm not sure just, how much pleasure that would transmit. This story reminds me of Dennis Erectus. Dennis was a wacky DJ on the air here in the Bay Area back in the 1980s, and he used to do all these fantasy routines about Nancy Reagan's vibrator and how it went into the shop, and the people at the shop were speculating on how she used it and all that stuff. So, but in addition to the control function, data is collected and sent back to the manufacturer, a company called Standard Innovation, letting the company know about the temperature of the device and the vibration intensity. Information about the user's sexual habits. Now, that's pretty creepy. I don't know what you do with data like that. Maybe you serve ads for, lubricants when the temperature gets too hot. I just don't understand that. But you've been warned. Your vibrator may be sending data about your sex life that you don't want to share with anybody else. And please don't share it with me. I'm Peter B. Collins. This free podcast is available every day on YouTube.
Happy trails to you until 'Happy trails.